Hi, my name is Carrie Pedro, and this is my video for why Daryl Morris recommends testing word recognition in isolation in contextual reading and also in spelling. Am I more of a visual learner or um, like I do better looking at things? And I'm a little bit nervous, so I went ahead and made my PowerPoint pop up so that I'd be able to keep on task. So the first thing in chapter 3 that I read about was word recognition in isolation. And Morris did a good job pointing out that when students read the words in isolation, they are unable to use context clues. So therefore, like if I was giving this to a student in my class, I would get a clearer picture of the word recognition ability. So I'd be able to know if were using context clues when reading, but in isolation, I'd be able to look at just their reading ability for the spellings for the isolation word knowledge to see if they could read words by themselves. After administering this, I'd be able to look and see that the higher the list the students were able to read with little errors indicates that they have more word knowledge. So they would have mastered the word recognition skills that they had learned in earlier grades. I teach second grade, so these would still be taught mostly. Even if students are above the primary grade, so let's say they're in fourth or fifth, Morris points out that even if fifth grade students started with these words in isolation, teachers would be able to see if they do have their good foundational skills in order to move on to higher lists. By administering this assessment in isolation, this would give me a good place to start the child on the independent reading level, or like the book went on to explain in the IRI, I would know where to start my independent reading assessments for the kids based off of these words in isolation. Depending on how I would analyze these results of the assessment, I would be able to see what the weaknesses the child had. And lastly, by giving these isolated word lists, it would help me to know where to start the reading passages so that if they were in second grade, but they are reading at a second grade level, I wouldn't have to start with the pre-primer word um, reading comprehension story because I know that they'd probably be able to read the second grade passage fine. So the rationale for word recognition and the contextual reading for like the IRI or another reading inventory is by having students read passages, I'd be able to see if the student relies on word skills or context clues to fix errors. So I'd be able to look at what type of errors the students made on the examination assessment, and I'd be able to see if I need to reteach skills or be able to scaffold the instruction and model. After administering the assessment, I'd be able to see if the students were reading at an independent instructional level or a frustration level. When I'm done scoring the results, if it's the reading passages, I could look at the levels of each child and see the types of errors that they made, which would allow me to put the kids into groups to see if I needed to teach. Maybe it was using context clues when reading an unknown word, or if the errors that these groups of children were making changed the meaning of the sentence they were reading. I'd also be able to check fluency of the passage by administering if I was timing this, and I'd be able to see if students lacked like chunking skills or like on the video where we had to remember that FBI. I can't even remember the last six, IMC, MMI, or whatever the last six were. I do remember FBI. And then if the students weren't able to chunk, then I'd be able to know I need to focus on those skills when working with those groups. And I'd also be able to compare student results with the reading rate graph in the textbook to check the norms of my class's oral reading rates to see if they were below, on average, or even above. Testing oral reading and silent reading gives me more insight to the three reading levels of the students. I think the textbook said like after second grade, most students read silently. So by giving these in both oral and silent, I think it gives teachers a better indication of actual skill levels. Lastly, for the rationale and the spelling, it's said in the textbook, the studies show that spelling and word knowledge usually coincide closely together. This gives insight to students' spelling rule knowledge, like mentioned above. So maybe the students are good at chunking, but they are struggle with prefixes or suffixes or maybe vowel patterns. I'd be able to help these kids in groups, like I said on the last slide too. Higher list progression means the students are more knowledgeable about spelling patterns and that they have mastered the fundamental spelling skills, kind of like in the same reading. If a student is able to read um, third grade and they're at third grade level, we know that they've probably mastered pre-primer, primer, and first grade levels. And this, by doing the recognition spelling, this shows types of errors that can cause misspellings that allow teachers to go back and reteach or scaffold instruction. But I think the major reason that the Morris has us looking at the word recognition in all three categories is to give a more precise picture of student abilities and independent instructional and frustration levels. One thing I took away from this is that it could be like a kid having a bad day, could be stress of being timed. So by getting a better picture in all three of these areas, teachers are able to get a bigger whole picture instead of just one assessment and make better guided choices for the individual students. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to your feedback too.